snow on ridge didn't fall so much as arrive, sideways and personal, like it had a grudge and knew your name. Sergeant Major Walter lay in it with his left shoulder open to the weather, and his right hand still curled around a tripod leg he hadn't let go of in 11 minutes. He was 71 years old. He had 3 replacement joints, 2 hearing aids currently frozen into his ear canals, and a granddaughter turning 9 in 14 days who had specifically requested that he be present, alive, and wearing the ugly sweater. The blood on his parka had stopped spreading. That was either very good news or the worst news available. Had been in enough cold places to know it was usually the second one. Above him, they were laughing. They did that. Not cruelty exactly. Had spent 41 years learning the difference between cruelty and the thing that looks like it, but a kind of luminous, delighted certainty. 4 of them stood in a loose crescent on the slope, 8 feet each, armor plating that ran with veins of blue light like something deep-sea and patient. Their skin was the color of a bruise 3 days old. Their teeth were very white, and there were a great many of them. The one in front pointed at him with a hand that had 1 finger too many, and the gesture was so human, so much like a guy in a bar identifying the man who'd insulted his sister, that almost laughed himself. Then the tall one came down the slope, and the laughing stopped. He was older, could tell because the blue light in his armor moved slower, the way an old man's blood does. There were carvings in his chest plate, dozens of them, layered over each other like a doorframe where a family measures its children. "Do not," said the in English, "have a cow." Blinked snow off his lashes. "Say again." "You are, as your people express it, bumming." The translator at the alien's throat clicked and hummed. "This is understandable, but there is no need for the harshing of the mellow. I am overseer of the 9th descent, and you, elderly one, are about to receive a very great honor." Era thought, with the strange floating clarity of a man who'd lost enough blood to find things funny. They calibrated their translators on 1985. Somewhere out there a linguist watched 400 hours of Miami Vice and thought that's it, that's the language. Honor said sure. Knelt. The snow compacted under him with a sound like a fist closing. Up close he smelled of ozone and something faintly sweet, like a hospital that had recently been a garden. 400 years, he said, they have conquered. 91 species have knelt, and in all that time we have never taken a warrior's death from him. That would be theft. He gestured, and one of the younger dragged something up the slope and set it down in the snow beside with the reverence of a man returning a wedding ring. It was the M2. Looked at it for a long moment. 4 feet of machined steel on a splayed tripod, barrel jacket rimed white, the receiver still faintly warm where his own hands had worn the finish down to bare metal over 11 years. The feed tray cover was closed. Somebody had brushed the snow off it. Somebody had been careful. "The right of dignified cessation," said, and his voice had gone quiet and formal, the register men use in churches and at gravesides. "Your body has failed. Your kin are scattered. The cold is coming, and it is honest, and it does not hurry. We leave you your weapon so that you may meet it on your own terms at an hour of your choosing. This is the oldest thing we do, older than our ships, older than our alphabet." His throat worked. He realized with some surprise, moved. Not enough to change anything, but moved. "That's a hell of a thing," he said. "It is," inclined his great head. 91 species, 91 times, not one has refused. "Yeah," shifted his weight, a bright, obscene bolt of pain went up his side and he let it wash through and out and got his palm flat against the receiver. "Hey, question. Ask. You leaving the ammo?" The overseer straightened. Something crossed his face that would spend a long time afterward trying to name. Offense, maybe. The specific wounded dignity of a man asked whether he intends to pay for dinner. Elderly one actually put a hand to his chest. "A weapon without teeth is not a mercy. It is an insult. It is a joke told at a funeral." He snapped his fingers and the young laid a green steel can in the snow, then a second. 200 rounds, linked as we found them. We have handled them with respect. 200 repeated. Is it insufficient? We can bring more. No, his voice did something odd on the word. He cleared his throat. No, that'll do it. Rose and his scanners painted the old man in a soft blue sweep and read what they always read. Vitality Index, 11%. I at 11% could not lift a spoon, could not close a hand, could not, in any meaningful biological sense, be said to be present. The scanners were not wrong. They simply had no column for a pension dispute with the Department of Veterans Affairs that had been ongoing since March. No field for 3 knee surgeries. No metric whatsoever for a 9-year-old girl in who had already picked out the sweater. Peace, said, be upon your radical journey. He turned to his warriors. Record it for the archive of honorable endings. They filed up the slope, unhurried, backs to him, the way you walk away from something already finished. Lay there and let the snow land on his face and thought about how strange it was to be handed your own death by someone who genuinely believed he was being kind. 91 species. Not one refused. They'd had 400 years to build a tradition and nobody had ever once, not a single time, considered what the gift was actually for. They gave me a ma deuce and 200 rounds, he thought, and they called it a funeral. He got his ruined shoulder under him. He got the can open. His hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to seat the belt, and the pain was a white sound behind his eyes, and he did it anyway, because he had been doing things anyway since 1974. The feed tray cover came down with a solid, agricultural clack. Then Sergeant Major Walter, 71, 11%, pulled the charging handle back twice, and the universe cleared its throat. The first burst took 11 seconds to change 400 years of history. Didn't aim so much as place it. 6 rounds, low and left, into the pack of them where the slope funneled the beaten zone, the ugly geometry that every machine gunner learns and no one who hasn't been on the wrong end of it ever really understands. The M2 didn't crack like a rifle. It thudded, a deep percussive knocking, like God at the door of a house with the music up too loud. The rearmost simply stopped existing from the sternum down. His armor had been engineered across 9 generations to defeat plasma lance, shear, and coherent particle bloom. It had been tested against every weapon system in the galaxy. It had never once been tested against a 2-inch cylinder of lead and copper traveling at 2,900 feet per second, because no surviving civilization was primitive enough to still be throwing rocks. They learned this, all of them, very quickly and in a specific order. Went down not from a hit but from the noise the hive-link screamed, 4 mines detonating into his at once, and he hit the snow face first with his hands over the sides of his skull. In 4 centuries of command he had felt warriors die. It was a clean sensation, a light going out, a door closing gently in another room. This was not that. This was a room full of glass being pushed down a staircase. He rolled and looked back, and saw the dying one sitting up. Sitting up. The old human was propped on his ruined shoulder with his cheek against the receiver, and there was snow melting off the barrel jacket in long white ribbons, and he was, translator strained, faltered, and offered the only word it had he was talking to it. Easy, Doris said. I know it's cold, neither of us is what we were. He walked the burst right. The gun bucked against his sternum, and every recoil impulse traveled up through a shoulder that had been opened by shrapnel 40 minutes earlier, and he made a sound in his throat that was mostly animal, and he did not stop, because stopping and hurting were unrelated activities and always had been. The second tried to charge. This was doctrine, tactical philosophy refined over 2,000 years of conquest, held that all directed energy weapons required a recharge interval, and that the correct response to sustained fire was to endure the burst and close during the dead cycle. It was elegant. It had worked on 91 worlds. The M2 Browning has no recharge interval. The M2 Browning was designed in 1918 by a man in Utah who wanted something that would simply continue, and it does, and it did. The covered 9 meters. On the Hive link, the chatter tore itself apart. Translator, still stubbornly calibrated to a decade of intercepted Earth broadcast, still gamely rendering panic through the vocabulary of shoulder pads and neon, delivered the death of his command element in the idiom of a beach movie. Overseer, overseer, this is not tubular. Is gone, is totally gone. Abort the right, abort THE. It's the dying one. The dying one is you and dying. He is not, repeat, not chilling. Crawled behind a spine of black rock and pressed his back to it and tried to think, and could not, because the tactical intelligence woven through his armor had encountered an input it could not resolve and was cycling the same query into his skull on a loop like a stuck record. Subject vitality, 11%. Subject vitality, 11%. Subject vitality, 11. I know what it says, he roared in to nobody. Out in the white, shifted the tripod 6 inches with his elbow and began to traverse. He couldn't move his legs, hadn't been able to since the first exchange, and had made his peace with it somewhere around minute 2. But a machine gun is not a rifle, and a gunner is not a rifleman, and had spent 11 years explaining this to bored 19-year-olds in Georgia heat who wanted to be doing literally anything else. Grazing fire, you don't shoot at a man. You shoot at a place. You make a room out of air about a meter tall and you make it very rude to be in, and then you wait for someone to walk into your room. He built the room, walked into it. Somewhere in there minute 4 arrived, and with it the tank. It came over on a cushion of displaced gravity. 40 tons of armor plate that had never in its service history been fired upon by anything it could not simply absorb, and saw it, and did something that would later be reviewed by 3 separate committees and understood by none of them. He reached back, left-handed, blind, screaming through his teeth, and found the second can, the one he'd marked with a strip of duct tape and a Sharpie because his eyes weren't what they were. API. Armor-piercing incendiary. A belt he had linked himself at a folding table in a garage in Ohio in the autumn of 2019, listening to a Tigers game go badly, because his son-in-law had said, in the gentle, careful voice people use on old men that maybe needed a hobby. He fed it in. He closed the cover. He said, "Sorry, Doris, this one's gonna sting," and he laid 200 grains of tungsten core into the tank's ventral induction port at a rate of 550 rounds per minute. The hover tank stopped being a hover tank. It became, briefly, a very large light, and then it became weather. And then, at minute 5, with the barrel glowing a soft sullen orange, and the snow melted to bare black rock in a 40-foot radius, and the last brass casing tinkling down into the slush, there was nothing left to shoot. Silence came back to Ridge like something apologizing. Came out from behind the rock. He had no weapon. He had not thought to bring one. He walked down the slope through the wreckage of the 9th descent, past the carvings on his brothers, and the snow was already beginning to cover them, patient and honest and unhurried, exactly as promised. At the bottom sat the old human, empty-handed, out of ammunition, out of blood, out of anything at all. He looked up at 8 feet of stunned alien nobility, and wiped his mouth with the back of a shaking wrist. "You gave me the gun," said almost kindly. "What you think was gonna happen?" Did not answer for a long time. He lowered himself into the slush across from the human, folding down joint by joint, until 8 feet of overseer of the 9th descent sat cross-legged in the melt like a schoolchild. The blue light in his armor had gone dim and irregular. Behind him the ridge ticked and steamed. "I need to understand," he said. "Figured you might." "You are not angry," turned his great head, studying him. "I expected the aftermath of frenzy involves a period of grief, shame. You are simply sitting." "Well," worked his jaw, There was blood in his beard frozen into little rubies. "I'm mostly just cold." The overseer's translator hummed, chewing on that. Then, with the careful precision of a man beginning an autopsy, "What is your warrior caste?" "My what?" "Your classification, your rank among the killing-born." He gestured at the wreckage, at the black smear that had been 40 tons of engineering. "To do that at 11% vitality, you must be a third tier at minimum, perhaps second. We have second-tier warriors who train from the shell. They do not eat with the others. They do not speak." "Thought about this?" "Supply sergeant," he said. "Is supply?" 11 years. Requisitions mostly. Boots, batteries, blankets." He shifted, winced. "Got written up in 91 for losing a clipboard." The silence that followed had a texture. His mouth opened, closed, opened. "You are logistics." "I was a lot of things. That was the longest one." The overseer put both hands flat on his knees and recognized the posture, had seen it in 100 young lieutenants and one memorable colonel, the physical stance of a man holding a map that no longer matches the ground. It was almost endearing. 2,000 years, said. The rite has been performed 2,000 years, 91 species, 91. He raised one enormous finger. Every one of them used the weapon on themselves. Yeah. Cleanly, many with gratitude, the wept, the composed songs about us. I bet they did. And not once did any of them turn, and he stopped. Something moved behind his eyes. You are laughing. It hurt like getting kicked, each breath dragging across the hole in his shoulder. And he did it anyway, helplessly, the way you laugh at a funeral when someone says the exact wrong thing. Son, he wheezed, I'm sorry, I am. But you gave a man with nothing left to lose a machine gun and you told him it was a present. It was a present. I know, that's what makes it funny. Stared, then he tried again, methodically, working down a list couldn't see. Berserker state, chemical override. Your species produces a combat enzyme, some inherited madness. Nope. Religious conviction, a promised afterlife contingent on. I go to church at Easter and I fall asleep. Then what? The overseer's voice cracked. Explain to me what I watched. Give me the word. Give me one word and I will file it and I will sleep. Looked at the snow coming down through the steam. Spite, he said. The translator at's throat clicked. Word, produced nothing. Clicked again, hunting, and finally offered something in a compound term, 2 syllables that didn't catch. That's not it, he said. What it give you? Joyful refusal. The overseer looked stricken. It is the nearest we have. It is a word for a child who will not sleep. Considered. Actually, that's pretty close. It is not a military word. No, agreed, it really isn't. And there it was. The thing had been circling since the first burst. The thing he'd known in his gut for 11 minutes and hadn't wanted to look at directly. He looked at it now. Why us, he said. Out of everything out there, why'd you come to Earth? Hesitated, then because he was a soldier and it was owed. Your weapons. What about him? They are archaic. He said it almost tenderly. The Concordance surveys every candidate world. We measure ascent, how quickly a species discards what it has. It is our finest predictor. A civilization that clings to obsolete tools is a civilization that has stopped climbing. He gestured at the M2 cooling in the slush, its finish worn to bare silver where its hands had lived. That weapon. Our archivists dated its design pattern. It is 108 of your years old. 108. We found dozens still in service. We ran the models 9 times. His voice thinned. Earth was classified Tier 9, negligible, the easiest conquest in 4 centuries. Started laughing again, and this time he couldn't stop, and it turned into coughing, and the coughing brought up something dark that he spat into the snow, and still he was grinning, gap-toothed and gray and 71 years old. Oh, that's beautiful, he said. That's buddy. Do not call me buddy. You looked at a 100-year-old gun and read it as decline, wiped his mouth. We didn't keep her because we couldn't build better. We built better a dozen times. Built lighter, faster, smarter. Committees full of men with degrees, and every single time they sat down with the numbers and looked at each other and said, he shrugged with one shoulder, why? She works. She's always worked. She'll work when the power's out and the computers are down and it's 40 below and nobody's coming. He tapped his own leg twice, and there was a hard plastic knock under the fabric. Knee brace, he said. 1994. Wife bought it. Wife's been gone 6 years. I've got insurance that buy me a new one tomorrow. He looked up. It works. Didn't move. Out on the ridge, the wind shifted, and the snow began to lay itself over the ninth descent, gentle and thorough, and somewhere in the overseer's magnificent 400-year-old mind a door opened onto a room he had never known was in the house. You did not keep the primitive weapons, he said slowly, because you are primitive. There it is. You kept them because they are sufficient. He raised his head, and his eyes were terrible. We did not survey a species that had stopped climbing. We surveyed a species that had arrived, and then kept every rung of the ladder in the garage in case. Now you're getting it. 9 models. His voice had gone very quiet. We ran 9 models. All 9 measured the wrong thing. And then his armor chimed, a single clean tone, orbital priority, the sound of high command. And a voice said something in his ear that made the overseer of the ninth descent go absolutely still. There is a fleet, he said, coming down. Stood, and the movement had no grace in it. Warship classification, he said into his collar. Give me tonnage, give me armament profile. The reply came back scrambled with confusion. He listened. He listened longer. Then he turned to the human in the snow with an expression would have paid money to photograph. They are not warships. Nope. 43 vessels, surplus atmospheric transports, most of them older than, he stopped himself. Of course they are older. Everything you own is older. His voice climbed. Command reports 43 critically degraded biological units aboard, vitality indices between 19 and 31%. Bone density catastrophic, cardiac irregularities across the entire complement. 2 of them are legally blind. That be Ernie and said, drives. Drives. He's got a system. Pressed the heels of both hands against his skull. High Command has read the descent profile as a medical evacuation, a mercy flight. They have lowered the orbital shield to permit it through, out of respect. He looked up wild, out of respect for the right. Hus squinted at the sky. Well, that's convenient. You knew. Shifted, and the pain took him for a second, and he came back out of it grinning. They were supposed to be here 4 hours ago. They stopped for coffee. Bill's prostate did the rest. I have been lying in this snow since 0900 wondering if I was gonna have to do this whole planet myself. They came down through the cloud deck then, 43 ugly rectangular shapes, unpainted, mismatched, one of them trailing a strip of duct tape 40 feet long that somebody had applied to a hull seam in 2031 and never gotten around to replacing. Their engines made a sound like giving a eulogy. The third orbital irregulars had arrived, average age 63, the denture division. Watched them drop past the shield line his own people had opened. He watched ramps fall in the snow. He watched a very small man in a parka 3 sizes too large step out with a thermos in one hand and something belt-fed in the other, look around at the smoking ruin of the ninth descent, and say, distinctly, across 400 meters of dead air, "You didn't leave us any." Language. I drove 40 minutes. Sat back down in the slush, not gracefully. He simply stopped being able to stand. Explain it to me, he said. All of it, now, while I still have the mind to hold it. So did. He told it plainly, the way supply sergeants tell things, without ornament. That 11 days ago a scout craft had gone down in the Kestrel Basin, and the irregulars had stripped it, And among the salvage was a data core full of ceremonial doctrine that nobody in command cared about because it wasn't ordnance. That the core had sat in the medical bay for 6 days. That had been in that bay with a fractured wrist and a bad attitude, and everyone had assumed he was asleep, because that is what everyone assumes about a 71-year-old man in a chair. He had not been asleep. He had been reading the manual. All of it. Every appendix, every footnote, the way he'd read every technical manual, every regulation, every warranty card he'd ever been handed, not out of diligence, but because nobody else would, and somebody has to know where things are. And on page 411, in a footnote to an annex on subject world protocols, he had found the right of dignified cessation. 2,000 years unbroken, 91 species. The defeated warrior is left his weapon. So I told the boys, I said, they'll leave one of us alive if he's dying and alone, and they'll hand him back his gun, and they'll take their fleet off station to honor the funeral because these people have manners. He looked up at the alien. All we needed was a volunteer. His voice was barely there. You volunteered to be shot. I volunteered to be left. His grin faded, and what was underneath it was old and steady and not funny at all. Getting shot was Bill's idea. He said I wouldn't sell it otherwise. You are a supply sergeant. Son, I lost a clipboard in 1991, and I have been reading paperwork ever since so it would never happen again. He shrugged his good shoulder. You want to know how humans win? We don't. Mostly we just outlast the guy who assumed we'd stopped paying attention. Above them, the first of the transports settled. Somewhere, a hydraulic ramp failed and hit the snow with a bang, and 11 old men swore in unison, and one of them said, "Told you to grease that." Closed his eyes. He would learn later what it cost. That the combat record leaked across the concordance within a week. That 91 subject species watched a dying human refuse to die over and over in slowed frames. That the right of dignified cessation was suspended galaxy-wide on the 11th day, and that it was already too late because 3 worlds had tried it and one of them had succeeded. That the archive would eventually add an entry filed under a symbol with no clean translation, meaning roughly, give them nothing, not even kindness, especially not kindness. But that was later. Now there were medics in the snow and hands under him, and holding the thermos to his mouth like it was a chalice, and coughing and swearing and asking whether anyone had thought to bring the ugly sweater. They loaded him onto the stretcher, walked beside it, unarmed, uncontested, a prisoner nobody had bothered to formally take. One question, the overseer said. Shoot, poor choice of words. If we had not left you the weapon, he kept pace, huge and gray and hollowed out. If we had taken it as any sane species would, what would you have done? The stretcher stopped at the ramp, lifted his hands into the falling snow and turned them over, arthritic, split-knuckled, one thumb bent wrong since 1988, 71 years of hands. Son, he said, I'd have improvised. And then he was inside, and the ramp came up, and of the 9th descent stood alone in the dark with the snow filling in the last of his brothers, and understood that his people had spent 400 years perfecting the art, taking everything from a species, and had never once considered what happens when you leave one of them something. 6 weeks later, on a world never visited and could not have pronounced, the Concordance revised its threat for the first time in 3 centuries. Humanity was moved from Tier 9, negligible. The new entry read, Tier 1, do not engage, do not provoke. And beneath it, in the hand of an overseer who had asked for one word and been given the wrong one. Do not, under any circumstances, be polite to them.